Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Recovery Summit presented by St. Clair County Community Mental Health with support from the St. Clair County Health Department. Today's presentation is My Search for Serenity, presented by Victor Polito. I know most of you have already heard this, but we're going to go over a few just general reminders. Please use the chat feature for all questions or comments. Our presenter will be answering questions as time allows. Today's presentation offers one social work CE, one MCBAP credit, and one peer credit. If you are requesting professional credits, you must remain on the webinar the entire time for credit. If you lose connection, please reconnect as soon as you are able. A survey will pop up following the conclusion of the webinar. Those of you that are requesting social work CEs, a completion of the survey is necessary. And now I would like to introduce our presenter, Victor Polito. Victor is a 12-year veteran of the United States Marine Corps. During that time, he served around the world as an air traffic controller and spent 7 months in Al Asad, Iraq. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending my webinar. I appreciate it. Once again, my name is Victor Polito. I am the Veteran Peer Support here at St. Clair Community Mental Health. And this is my webinar, My Search for Serenity. When I was asked to come up with a name for this, this idea popped up in my head right away. I was always taught not to go with my first idea, the first thing that pops up in my head. But when this one popped up, I knew it was the right decision, the right name right away. If I was going to title my recovery in one sentence, this is how I would title it. To me, I think this is what it was all about, was finding that serenity. I remember the first time that I stepped into an AA meeting back in 2001, long time ago. And at that time, they talked about serenity all the time. Serenity sounded like a mythological word to me. It sounded like it was up there with the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. I didn't believe in it. I didn't think it was something I could ever have. What is serenity? According to Google, serenity is the state of being calm, peaceful, and untroubled. To me, it was those things, but it was also being able to live with myself at peace and not be consumed with memories of my past, regret, guilt, and self-hate. So today, my presentation will be about my struggles and my path to recovery, my path to serenity, how I found it, and how it's changed my life. Some of you may know me. I am not from Michigan. I am from Mississippi. I was born in Biloxi, Mississippi back in 1978. I was raised right next door to Biloxi in Gulfport, Mississippi. It's where both my parents are from, but my dad was in the Air Force and I was born on an Air Force base. My parents divorced about a year after I was born, and they were married for 6 years before that. I really don't know much about their marriage. No one would tell me anything my entire life. My dad would tell me one story about the end of the marriage. My mom would tell me a very different story about the end of the marriage. And no one I knew, none of my family, would give any information to me about my parents' marriage. So it was always a source of mystery to me. Anyways, for the next few years, I lived with my mother, just the two of us, until I was 7 or 6.5. That's when she remarried. She remarried because she had gotten pregnant, and they decided to get married. Now, her new husband had 2 children, 2 daughters from a previous marriage, and she had myself. I don't know when they made their agreement, but I don't know if they made it before their child was born or after their child was born. But at some point, they made an agreement between the two of them. I do know that much because in my late 20s, they told me about the agreement. The agreement is that they were going to put all their time, focus, attention, and money on their child. And they agreed that they were going to equally ignore, neglect myself and the 2 girls. That way that we would go away, that was their intention, to drive us away so that they could focus on their family, the 3 of them as a unit. And their plan worked fairly well for them. The girls, my 2 stepsisters, they only visited summer and Christmas time. They lived in California with their mother. And after just 2 years of this, they stopped coming around. They quickly figured out what was going on. Unfortunately, I stayed around for a few more years. I stayed around for 7 years. My parents My mom stuck to her agreement. She did not spend any money on me, no clothes. She didn't buy anything for me. I wasn't allowed to have any friends or any activities. Fortunately, I had my grandparents. That's where I spent most of my time, her parents. They were my saving grace. They bought me the things I needed. They bought my clothes, and I spent my time with them. My grandmother was heavy into church. I spent time with her going to church. And my grandfather, he was always on the water. We had the Gulf of Mexico and we had freshwater. So he and I were always fishing, crabbing, shrimping, floundering, whatever we could do on the water. So I was always with my grandparents. Fortunately, they also taught me values, what's right and wrong. For example, if you've met me, you've probably heard me say ma'am and sir a million times. I got that from them. I like to believe I got anything good that I learned in my childhood, I learned from them. But at home, things were pretty bad. I was very lonely and very neglected. I stuck to myself. I knew I wasn't wanted around at home because my mother told me. She began to tell me in my childhood that she did not like me, that she, in fact, in her words, hated me because I reminded her of my father, because I looked like him, acted like him, and my mother hated my father more than I've ever seen another person hate a person. Never really knew why. She always told me it's because he left us. And he always told me a completely different story. So in early childhood, I had a mother who physically hated my dad, violently hated him. And whenever they had to communicate, they had to do that a couple of times a year when it was time for me to visit. I dreaded when she had to talk to him on the phone because I knew afterwards she was going to be angry and she was going to take it on me, physically, verbally, or both. If she had to see him, which happened once or twice a year, that was even worse. Her reactions to him were quite extreme, but she would not tell me why she hated him so and why she behaved like this. I had no idea. So when I was about 13, my dad filed a police report of abuse against my mother. And it took them like 6 months to investigate it. But when they did, they asked me if I still wanted to live with my mom. And at that point, I opted to not live with my mother anymore and move with my father. I had just turned 14 and I moved to San Antonio, Texas. For the next 7 years, 6 or 7 years, I didn't have a relationship with my mother. She and I barely talked for the next few years. She was angry at me for leaving. And I felt this is when my abandonment issues began to really affect me and my life. I was very quiet and didn't know how to communicate, didn't know how to share, talk about my feelings, and didn't know how to deal with what I was going through. So things were pretty quiet. I was only in San Antonio, Texas for a year. My dad was still in the Air Force. So a year later, we transferred to Albuquerque, New Mexico. I remember that summer we had just moved to Albuquerque. I think I might have just turned 15. One evening, I was sitting at home with my dad, and he got himself a beer from the fridge, and he handed me one. I had tasted beer before. This is the first time I ever had an entire one. And when I was done, he got me another one. That was it. He didn't give me any more after that. But I'll never forget that second beer. At the end of that second beer, I remember looking around the living room. I remember chuckling to myself. I remember a couple of thoughts I had that night. First thought I had was that I felt like I was at home. For the first time, I felt like I was home. Second, I remembered thinking this. I remembered thinking if everyone feels like this when they are drinking, then everyone would be drinking all the time. And I really don't understand. 15-year-old me does not understand why everybody is drinking because this is amazing. Now, at this time, I had already probably seen signs of alcoholism in my family. My mom was an alcoholic. She drank every day I knew her, either beer or bourbon. Those were her two things, whichever one she wanted that day, sometimes both at the same time. Her second husband, was also an alcoholic, also a heavy drinker. My mom only had one sibling, her brother, Greg. He's an architect, also an alcoholic, very successful architect, but I will talk more about his alcoholism later on. So I had seen a lot of signs of alcoholism. And to be completely honest with you, I do think that it was that first night when I was 15 that I started to suspect that I might also be an alcoholic. So for the next year, things were pretty quiet in Albuquerque. My junior year in high school, I really started to rebel. I started to experiment with drugs. I didn't drink too much at this point because drugs were easier to get in New Mexico. Um, but I started to show a history of lying. And skipped a lot of school. Junior year was a hard year. The next year, senior year, I stayed out of trouble just because I was tired of being in trouble. I was in trouble the entire year. Now, at the beginning of the senior year, my two best friends, two closest friends, joined the United States Marine Corps, and they were going to go to boot camp right after high school. Now, I had never really talked too much about the Marine Corps, but I had always been interested in the Marine Corps. When I was a little kid, I remember the commercials they had, and their uniforms were amazing. Nobody looked like them in uniform. Nobody looked like the Marine Corps to me, period. People looked up to them differently. People respected the Marine Corps differently, and the Marine Corps stood out, at least to me. So when my two best friends joined, I was very interested. And they had a year now to get ready for boot camp. They were going to go to boot camp right after high school. They had a year to spend time with their recruiter and prepare both mentally and physically. I went with them. I went with them to several events. I helped them prepare. I helped them work out. I helped them get in shape. And they went off to boot camp. I did not go to the military right after high school. My dad was still in the military. He was an officer. And, it's his opinion that I should go to college first, get my degree, and then go as the military if that's what I wanted as an officer. So what I ended up doing is I moved back to Mississippi after high school, moved in with my grandparents to go to college. And for the first 9 months or so, everything was going really well. Things were going smooth. I was doing very well in school. I was staying out of trouble. But in spring of the next year, I fell into the wrong crowd again, and I moved in with them this time. And my focus became partying, spending more time getting involved in marijuana mainly, but also I began to drink more. And I started to really show a history of how my drinking will be in the future. When I drank, I didn't just drink to have a beer or two. I drank to get drunk. And no matter how good I felt, I always wanted to feel better. So this started a history of me blacking out, for one, and also really extreme hangovers. Every time I drank to get drunk. But at this point, I wasn't drinking too much. It was more like binge drinking here and there. Uh, but things continued to develop. Partying became my focus in school. So at this point, I was working full time, going to college full time, and partying full time as well. I ran out of money for college. I couldn't afford it with my lifestyle. So I just worked for the next year, told lies about being in school, hurt my grandparents very badly. My grandparents are the two people that believe in me more than anything. Both my parents were abusive towards me. Those last couple of years I lived with my dad were pretty rough. My dad was not abusive when I first moved in with him, but he did become physically abusive. Not mentally and verbally abusive quite in the ways my mom was. Things were pretty bad when I was living with her as well. So at this point, I'm doing pretty bad. I hurt my grandparents horribly. And I wanted to I wanted to make things right. I wanted to prove some things to myself. I wanted to get some discipline, and I wanted to get some money so I could go back to college. So I decided to join the military. But for reasons I've already mentioned, there was only one branch for me to consider. It wasn't really anything of an option to me. I was going to go to the Marine Corps. I went to boot camp in May of 1999 in wonderful San Diego, California. I had 3 months of fun in the sun. Graduated boot camp in August of 1999. I remember a few months after I got out of boot camp, I had gone home for Christmas a few months later, and I ran into an old friend of mine. And he just acted completely amazed and told me about the differences in myself that he saw. Before I joined the Marine Corps, I had zero self-confidence, zero esteem, zero pride in myself. If I had a conversation with you, I would probably look down at the ground while we were talking. I probably wouldn't look at you, and I certainly wouldn't look you in the eyes. I had no confidence. The Marine Corps gave me that confidence. They gave me that pride. And they gave me something else I had never had. The Marine Corps gave me belonging. I had found a brotherhood. I don't think I realized how badly I needed it and how much it meant to me. But I loved the Marine Corps. So after boot camp, I went to air traffic control school in Pensacola, Florida, Naval Air Station, Pensacola, Florida. Now, when I joined the Marine Corps, I didn't do my homework. I didn't know that at that time, air traffic control, the job I went into, was the #1 job in the entire world for alcoholism and suicide at that time. I didn't know. So man, I was gonna fit in so well, and I had no idea. But I get to air traffic control school, and now the drinking really starts to increase heavily. At this point, I'm probably getting drunk probably probably more like 5 days a week at least, if I can help it, if I can afford it. It's everywhere, so easy to get. I'm 22 at this point, or 21 at this point, so I am legal. I can purchase it, and I am drinking as much as I can, and it's completely acceptable. Everyone else is too, so I think it's normal, and I think the amount that I'm drinking is normal. I graduated air traffic control school in February of 2000 and moved to Marine Corps Air Station, Iwakuni, Japan. This is on the main island of Japan, about an hour south of the city of Hiroshima. I loved Japan. It's a beautiful country, beautiful people, and the food was amazing. But of course, my top priority when I was in Japan was drinking, partying. And I found the right crowd to fit into because they had the same focus as I did. And that's what we spent most of our time doing. I wish I could remember more of Japan. Wish I had traveled a little bit more when I was there. But partying and drinking was definitely my priority. Now, also in Japan, I started to really build a reputation as a drinker, which is really interesting because I'm in the Marine Corps, which is known for its drinking, and I'm in air traffic control, which is the #1 job in the world for alcoholism, and yet somehow I'm standing out among everyone else as a drinker and someone with a problem. I remember a few months after I checked into Japan, I had a new sergeant check in. He was going to be directly above me. He was going to be my sergeant. So he's an E5. He's a sergeant. I'm a lance corporal in E3. So he outranks me by a couple ranks. And when I met him, he laughed. He said, "Yeah, I've heard about you, Polito." You see, we had another Polito in the station in air traffic control. We had a master sergeant, Polito. He was an E8. So he's quite above both of us. His name is not spelt the same as mine. Mine is Polito. His is Pulido. So it's a little bit different pronunciation, but it sounds very similar. The sergeant was hearing two other lance corporals, two other E3s, talk about Polito and how intoxicated he got over the weekend and all the stuff he did. And the sergeant started to tear into these two lance corporals. How dare they talk about their master sergeant like that? They had to explain to him, "We're not talking about the master sergeant. We're talking about a lance corporal, Polito." So when I met him, he laughed. He said, "Yeah, I've already heard about you, Polito. I'll be watching you." And I laughed too. Like I was proud of this reputation, but on the inside, I saw where it was going. I was embarrassed that I was known among all these other heavy drinkers. I had been pointed out as the one with the problem. So my reputation started to grow. I started to hear a lot of stories about myself. The blackouts just increased. It became a very normal thing for me to wake up and have to go around and get stories about last night that I don't remember, and then have to go around and apologize for things I don't remember doing. That really started to become the norm for me in Japan, along with these really severe hangovers. At this point, I'm tend to drink 7 days a week if I can. If I can afford it and I have the time and the ability, and I say drink. If I'm drinking, I'm getting drunk. So at this point in Japan, I'm getting drunk 7 days a week if I can help it. I was only in Japan for a year. And then after that, in the beginning of 2001, I moved to Marine Corps Air Station, Yuma, Arizona. I quickly, again, found the other drinkers in Yuma. They were easy to find, always are in the Marine Corps, and they're even easier to find in air traffic control. I quickly found them, and this is when my drinking began to get out of control for the first time in 2001. And somehow I always got lucky. A million times I should have gotten in some really bad trouble, but I always got lucky. For example, I remember a time in 2001, I drove to the front gate of the air station in Arizona at 3:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning. I pull up to the gate, and I have a minor Marine sitting next to me, a 20-year-old Marine sitting next to me who was intoxicated. The military policeman at the front gate asked me to step out of the car, and I did. And he conducted several tests on me. I failed all of them. He had me do a breathalyzer, and I failed that as well. So he knew that I was intoxicated with driving with an intoxicated minor in the car. And he tells me, Polito, you've been very polite, respectful, and you've done everything I've asked you with no issues. Tonight, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm going to park your car in the parking lot for you. You come get it tomorrow. But the next time I see anything like this happen, I will personally put you in jail myself. And he parked the car, and I went home. It always worked out like that for me. I always got really lucky. There's a lot of times I shouldn't have. Fortunately, I never hurt anyone. At the end of 2001, I realized how bad things were getting. It was so normal for me for these blackouts. These blackouts were becoming more and more common to the point that I was blacking out a couple of times a week every week. So I'm having to apologize all the time for the things I'm doing when I'm blacked out. So I asked the Marine Corps for help. I went to the Marine Corps and I said, identified myself as an alcoholic. At this point, I realized, I'm only 22 now, but I know that I'm an alcoholic. And asked the Marine Corps for help, and they gave me the help. They sent me to rehab on a submarine base in San Diego, back to San Diego again. And at that time, I stayed sober for a few months. That's when I began going to AA. Over the next couple of decades, I would go in and out of the AA, and even used to joke about the fact that I went to AA in multiple states as my story progresses. So I only stayed sober for a few months this time. I was still too cocky. I had the ego, I'm a Marine. There's nothing I can't do as a Marine. I can handle my drinking. I don't need the help. I can handle this. So that was the mindset I took moving forward. In 2002, I got married. I got married to a woman who had a 4-year-old son from a previous marriage, and she was a non-drinker. Maybe she drank once or twice a year, maybe. So my drinking immediately became an issue in our marriage, and continued to be an issue the entire marriage. In 2004, in the early summer of 2004, I had back-to-back weeks where I had a life-changing event happen in my life. First, at the beginning of the summertime, 2004, I get orders to deploy to Iraq. Go to Iraq. Then a week later, I found out that my wife was pregnant with my first child, my daughter, Carly, and that Carly would be born while I was in Iraq. So when it comes to going to a combat zone, going to war, we as veterans usually say that we remember there's 2 days we remember. They remember the day we go in, and we remember the day we come out. Of course, there's plenty I do remember in between, and there was a lot of trauma, the things I saw and experienced. Unfortunately, I just don't have the time to really go into the events of Iraq today. I will tell you that we knew that we weren't going to be able to drink in Iraq, It was going to be, we originally thought we were going for 6 months. We ended up doing an extra month. We did 7. But we knew we were going to be going into 6 months of sobriety. Several people went into withdrawals on the trip to Iraq. I kind of planned mine. I went to my withdrawals about a week before. So I would be in a little bit better shape when we got there. But there was a lot of us that were going through that when we first got there. So I got to Al Assad, Iraq. It's about an hour south of Baghdad. That's where I spent the next 7 months. I returned on February 28th, 2005. I'm so excited to get home. My daughter at this point is almost 8 weeks old. She's almost 2 months, and I get to meet her for the first time. But that still didn't stop me. I'd like to say I had complete focus on meeting my daughter for the first time, but my focus wasn't completely there. We were going to fly from Iraq to Kuwait. Then we were going to change planes, and from Kuwait, we were going to fly to Germany. We'd have to stop and refuel in Germany, and we were going to get off and go to the airport. And then we would have time, we'd have to stop again to refuel in Bangor, Maine. And then from Bangor, we would fly directly to Arizona. And we all knew that we would be able to get drunk in Germany and again in Bangor. And I knew that I would have time from Bangor to Arizona to sober up. So that's what I did. I wish I could say my focus was my daughter and I stayed sober. And I just wanted to get back to her. I drank on my way in Germany and Maine, got back to my daughter, so amazed to meet her. Now, when we got back from Iraq, several of us very quickly figured out that transitioning back from Iraq was not an easy thing to do. Loud noises would immediately set us off. None of us could relax. We were all on edge. I was used to carrying a rifle with me at all times. And now that I wasn't carrying a rifle with me, I felt naked. Several of us began to realize that we were showing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. But we all believed that the best thing to do would be to not talk about it and not say a word. We're all afraid of anyone finding out that we may have PTSD, because then they would send you to a psychologist. And if a psychologist could say that, for the time being, you cannot carry a weapon. If a psychologist says I can't carry a weapon, the military is going to say I can't serve and that I can no longer be in the military. So we're all feeling these symptoms, but none of us want to talk about it because we're all afraid of being discharged from the military. So we self-medicate. My drinking increased when I got back from Iraq. I quickly was able to get my tolerance back. And of course, this instantly became another issue with myself and my wife as well. Just getting back from Iraq with a newborn child, and I'm diving right back into the bottle as quickly as I can. So just a couple months later, I got orders to transfer out of Yuma, Arizona. And myself and my family, we moved to Marine Corps Air Station, Cherry Point, North Carolina, on the other side of the country. That's where we spent the next couple of years. My drinking, of course, continued to increase and continue to be a problem in marriage. In 2008, I received orders to go to Iraq for Afghanistan. I was going to Afghanistan for the entire year of 2009. That was what the plan originally. So I began preparing for my second deployment. However, just like a month later, I received new orders. At the time, the Marine Corps was hurting for recruiters. So at that point, recruiting duty orders took priority over combat zone orders. So instead of going to Afghanistan, I was going to recruiting duty. And got to go back to wonderful San Diego again for recruiting school. Graduated from recruiting school, and in the beginning of 2009, my family and I moved to Albertville, Alabama. This is northern Alabama in the mountains. It's an hour south of the city of Huntsville. Recruiting duty is extremely demanding, especially the first year. I was working 6 days a week, sometimes seven, 12 to 16 hours a day. Very demanding job. However, I still found time for alcohol, and just felt like I deserved it more, like I'd earned it more when I came time to drink. Um, at the end of 2009, in December, I took my family to Mississippi for a few days to visit my family. While I was there, my mom, my stepdad, my little brother took my family out to lunch. While we were at lunch, my mom told me that she had been diagnosed with lung cancer, and she lived for 7 months after that. She passed away in June of 2010. Um, the day she told me that she was sick, physically she appeared fine. You wouldn't have thought she was ill, um, but it quickly spread throughout her body. It spread to her spine, kidneys, liver, brain. So by the time she passed away, she had suffered a lot. She lost the use of her legs, lost the ability to walk. She had a lesion on her brain that caused her to go deaf, and she behaved like she had dementia or Alzheimer's in the last few weeks. She went through chemo and radiation. She had a lot going on those last few months. Yet somehow I expected her to want to mend things with me. And I somehow had this belief that we were going to mend things, mend our relationship and our issues before she passed away. Very selfish thinking of me. So when she passed away in June and we had not resolved our issues, I was an angry man. I was an extremely angry man. Didn't know what to do with that anger and those feelings. How dare she not want to mend my issues? She still didn't love me. Those are the feelings I had. So I began to drink more. I became angrier, and had been angry my whole life, but my whole life I had never known how to talk, communicate my feelings. Another major problem in my marriage, I wasn't able to communicate in my marriage. At least I didn't think I could communicate. I didn't know how. So I'm drinking heavily. I'm not leaning on my wife for support. And I made a mistake. Up until that point in my career, I had had a perfect career in the Marine Corps. I had never been in trouble. I had made it up to the rank of staff sergeant. It's an E6. So I was doing well in my career. I was so proud of myself and my career. I loved the Marine Corps. And at that point, I wanted to do the full 20, at least 20. I wanted to retire. But I made a mistake. A mistake I knew what the consequences of that mistake could be. I knew what I was doing. And because of that mistake, I was discharged from the Marine Corps in 2011. So I lost the Marine Corps due to my own behavior, my own mistakes. So at that point, I am consumed with shame, guilt, and anger. Also, after I got in trouble, I continued to deteriorate. I continued to drink more, and my marriage fell apart. So I lost the career, the military, and my marriage the same year, 2011. And at this point, I am not doing well financially. So I moved back to Mississippi, moving with my dad. I started going back to college full time and started working at a casino full time. And drinking continues. I'm not talking to anyone. I'm very depressed because I got myself kicked out of the Marine Corps because of my own mistakes. Plus, I'm angry at my mother. So there's a lot of stuff going on inside of me, and I'm not getting any help. I'm just using alcohol instead. I told you earlier about my uncle Greg, my mom's only sibling, extremely successful architect. The man specialized in glass, and he spent most of his career working in the cities of Sydney, Australia, Hong Kong, and Hong Kong. He was very talented, very intelligent, but he was also an alcoholic. My mom died in 2010. Greg drank himself to death in 2013. My grandmother watched her two only children die within a 3-year span of each other. My mom from cancer in 2010, Greg in 2013. My grandmother did not know how to handle the grief, and she became an alcoholic. Had to go to rehab, had to go through recovery for that. Also, at this time, I am also starting to develop a lot of anger at my father, because I've realized, my dad's told me my whole life that he did not beat my mother or cheat on her, that he did not earn that anger, that hate that she had towards him. He always said that her hate towards him came from mental illness. But I started to doubt that. I started to question that for the first time. Um, my dad said he didn't beat my mom, but he beat me when I was a teenager. He also beat my stepbrother who lived with me. So why would I believe him about that? My dad said he didn't cheat on my mom, but my dad at this point was on his fifth wife. He cheated on number 4 with number 5, and I also knew that he cheated on number 2 as well. So I no longer believed him on that one either. Now, my whole life, my grandfather had always told me that he knew secrets about my parents' marriage that he would never tell me. So at this point, I went to my grandfather and I told him the effect the secret was having on me, and I begged him to tell me what the secret was, and he refused. I told him that I really couldn't take being in Mississippi at that time. I'm a very sick alcoholic. I couldn't take being around my dad, that I was going to leave Mississippi and I was not going to come back. He said, okay. So I came to Michigan and moved in with the woman I had been talking to. My alcoholism fueled her to become an alcoholic. You have two alcoholics living together. That's not good. And I'm completely consumed with anger at myself. I'm losing my career, losing my relationships with my family and my children at this point. Everyone has given up on me, as they should have, because of the way I was behaving and had behaved for a long time. So the next couple of years, my drinking continues to develop until 2017. In 2017, I was 3 years from turning 40, or a couple of years from turning 40, and I was really starting to weigh. That was starting to weigh on my mind, and I was starting to realize that alcohol was going to control me for the rest of my life. That it already had control of me, and that it was only going to get worse, and that the only thing I had to look forward to uh, was a death like Greg's. So in 2017, I really started wanting to get away from alcohol for the first time. I wanted to get away from it, but I had no idea. I did not know how to get away from alcohol. And one day, actually on my birthday, 2017, I was sitting at our pool because we lived in a condo complex that had a pool, and I was pretty intoxicated. There was a gentleman living sitting out there that I had never met. We began talking. He told me that he was an alcoholic and been in recovery for about 9 years at that point. But he didn't judge me. He didn't discredit me because I was drunk. He just talked to me. He didn't try to push anything on me. The next day, Saturday, I was at the pool again. I was drinking again. He was there. But he really started to affect me and really started to make me think. So Sunday, I saw him at the pool. I only had one beer on Sunday, and I went out to him and asked him to take me to an AA meeting. And he said he would on the first day that I hadn't had a drink. So the next day, Monday, he took me to an AA meeting, and that was my first day of sobriety. That was July 24th, 2017, and I have not had a drink of alcohol since. Never in a million years thought I would be able to say that, but I haven't. So that was amazing. However, I was going through a lot at that time. My partner who I was living with did not quit drinking when I did. So for the next 2 years, I was living with a full-time alcoholic and, buying her alcohol for her on most days because she wasn't able to go get it herself. So that really started to really send us in two different directions. Also, now that I'm not drinking, I'm faced with all the reasons I was drinking in the first place. I'm faced with memories and feelings from my childhood, anger towards my mother, anger towards myself, the resentment towards myself, the guilt, um, I became consumed with the past and anger at my mom and myself and hate for my mom and myself. That was over the next few years. I became suicidal over the next few years. I didn't know how to talk to anyone. I didn't know how to share, communicate. I didn't know how to ask for feelings, ask for help. I'm sorry. In 2020, by 2020, I still hadn't gone home. I moved away from home in 2014, Mississippi. I hadn't gone back. And I was only talking to, I had one family member left who was talking to me at that point. That was my grandmother. So I made a plan to go visit her the day after my birthday of 2020. Unfortunately, my grandmother passed away the day before my birthday. So this really started to push me over the edge. And by the next year, I was starting to make plans for my suicide. And in fact, started to make some rather wild plans. And I bought a one-way plane ticket to Anchorage, Alaska. I had always been fascinated with Alaska. My plan was to hike around Alaska for the summertime and then in the wintertime freeze to death. That was my entire plan. Unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately, I did not make the plane. I missed it. So what I did do is I went to northern Maine instead, and started living off the land. And I had the same plan. However, the woman that I had been with when I quit drinking, she quit drinking 2 years after I did. And at this point, she was able to convince me to come back to Michigan and to start to look for help. So I came back to Michigan. I'm not working at this point. At this point, I don't think I was capable. And I came to CMH, Community Mental Health, and asked for services. They began helping me. Now, it took a couple of weeks to start seeing appointments. I met my first case manager through the first appointment. I remember when she asked me what my goals were. I don't have any goals. What do you want for the future? At this point, I had wanted nothing for the future. I hadn't wanted anything or hoped for anything for a long time. At this point, I was just so consumed with sadness and hatred toward myself. All I could think about was getting away from that. So we decided my goal would be to not hate myself. That's all my goal was, because that's all I could come up with. But it still was going to be a few weeks before I could meet a therapist, a clinician. And these feelings were so built up inside of me. On my second appointment with my case manager, I came in and I told her that if I can't get some help today, that this is going to be the last day that I live. And I told her how I would die. And I was completely 100% serious. It was likely to happen that day. So she got me the help. She was able to get me into the behavioral health unit at Lapeer McClellan, and I was there for a week. I have always referred to this as the first step in my recovery. This is where I can see things start to change. It was a long trip, it was a long journey, but I see the trip. I see it starting here. And that week I was in the hospital. I was able to get some medications. I had never gotten medications for everything I was going through. That helped tremendously. I was able to learn some new tools. This is when I started to learn the tools that would help me to feel better. And I had some time to decompress. But most importantly, something happened to me when I was in the hospital that was life-changing, something I never expected. On the second to last day that I was there, second to last night, I'm sorry, that I was in the hospital, a new person checked in. I believe she checked in around 2:30 or 3 in the morning. She was very angry when they checked her in. In fact, they had to put her into the padded room. And even though she was in there, she woke up everyone in the unit, kept us all awake for a couple hours because she was so loud and unhappy. So when we went into the breakfast room that morning, a lot of people were unhappy. A lot of people were tired. And she was sitting in there, the new woman who had just checked in. Now, because of the way she checked in, they had decided that she needed a staff member with her 24 hours a day. So she had a staff member standing next to her. And I remember the way she looked when we came in. She was an older lady. Unfortunately, not only was she struggling with mental illness, she also had physical disabilities. Um, but when she was sitting in her chair, she looked sad and lonely. And she was watching every one of us, like she wanted to talk to us. However, the other people with me, I don't think anyone wanted to talk to her. I think they were angry. Um, but I grabbed my breakfast tray and walked over to her table and asked her if I could sit down with her. And she said yes. And I sat down with her and she immediately started to talk to me. She told me her name. I'm just going to call her A. A told me all about her past. She had been alone for a long time, and I don't know if it was true or not. She claimed that she was sick, that she was ill, and she was dying, and she was very scared, and she was very alone, and she didn't feel like anyone was listening to her. We talked all through breakfast, and I had a great time talking to her. And I sat and talked to her at lunchtime. And then at dinner time, two other of my friends joined us as well. And so now we have a full table, and her face is just so happy. And she's talking to the other ones and getting to know them. And it was really cool to see how happy she was and the way that she was reacting. So the next morning is Monday. It's my last day in the hospital. I was going to leave immediately after lunch. So I had breakfast and lunch with my friend A. She was doing well. And right after lunchtime, I was at the desk and I was getting ready to leave. My friend A came up to the desk as well. And she was trying to talk to the staff. Unfortunately, A was starting to get upset again. She was getting angry. She didn't think they were listening to her. Now, she's so upset, she doesn't realize that just behind her, they are opening up the padded room again and they're getting it ready for her. And this made me sad. I'm about to leave and I'm going to watch her get put in a padded room. But for some reason, she just happened to look over at me. And I instinctively did this. I beckoned her to me. And she came over. She stopped what she was doing. She walked over to me. And so I just quietly said, "Hey, look, I know you want them to listen to you. Right now, I don't think they're listening because you're screaming and you're angry. And look right behind me. Just look, they opened up the padded room, eh? I don't want you to go in there, my friend. What I would like you to do is I would like you to turn around, go down the hallway, go back to your room, sit in there for an hour. And if you can come out and you can come back to the desk and you can talk to them and communicate with them like I'm talking to you now, I think they'll listen to you." And she did. She turned around and she walked away and she went back to her room. And unfortunately, that's the last time I ever saw A. We had a short friendship. But I'll be honest with you, that woman would never leave my mind. And I will always be grateful to her. So after I left the hospital, she started to be in my mind a lot because I realized something about A. Well, I realized a couple things about her. But first off, I realized that when I was with her, when I was eating with her, when I was talking to her at the desk, um, during those times, I didn't hate myself. I wasn't thinking about my life ending. I wasn't thinking about my past or how miserable I was. When I was with her, I was able to focus on the moment. I was able to focus on her, and I was able to just be. I really liked that. That stayed on my mind all the time. When I helped A, well, I thought I was helping A. When I first met her, when I ate with her, I thought I was helping her. I didn't understand. She was the one helping me. She gifted me with her friendship, and that is a gift that I will never forget. So when I got back, I got a new case manager, and I met her, fantastic lady. And I told her about A, and I told her about how good it helped to feel, how good it felt to help her. And she and I decided to make a new goal for me that I should start, that my goal should be to help others, find a job to get better so I can find a job to help others. But that meant I was going to have to get better first. So my focus, once I got back from the hospital, recovery became my focus. I met my clinician, an amazing, amazing clinician who told me, if you're going to get better, you're going to have to forgive yourself and your mother, and you're going to have to accept the past. I didn't think that was possible, but we worked on it. And I was able to successfully forgive my mother and accept everything that happened with her as a part of the past. I have no negative feelings towards her now. Now, here came the big one. I had to forgive myself. I didn't think that was possible, but I was. With the help of my clinician, I was able to forgive myself. I was able to let the past go, and I was able to start living in the moment. Amazing things began to happen in my life. When I met A, I think A lit a small flame of hope for me. When I began to hope that I could get better enough to help others, especially if I would get to help other veterans. At this point, I know that at this time, 22 veterans in the United States were killing themselves every day in America. For a long time, I thought that eventually my turn would come to be one of 22. Now that I am doing better, it just breaks my heart that every day I lose 22 of my brothers and sisters because they think they're alone, the way I used to think I was alone. I really wanted to help other veterans as well. Now that I'm feeling better, my case manager set me up with an employment specialist at CMH, and we start looking for me to go back to work. But now I only start looking for jobs where I can help people because that's what I wanted more than anything. That was the reason I focused on my recovery and focused on getting better. It's because I knew I wanted to help others. So I also started applying at CMH. However, I did understand that they were a little hesitant about hiring me at first, just because I was still receiving services and they wanted to make sure that I was ready. However, in May of 2022, the veteran peer support position became open here at CMH, and I applied for that. Now, at this point, my case manager and my clinician both did something for me I couldn't understand. They both went to the hiring manager and told him that I was ready, that I would do well, that I would not fail. The fact that they went to bat for me, that they believed in me, I couldn't believe it. I wasn't used to having people believe in me. It'd been a long time. And now at CMH, first they had given me hope, and then they had helped me not to hate myself. And now something truly amazing happened. And the hiring manager told me that they were going to hire me. And I got the position. So now CMH also gives me purpose. And now I get to come here every day and try to pay it forward, try to pay forward what was done for me. There were people that believed in me. There were people that cared and listened. I had a peer support and a case manager that were amazing, that showed interest in me and listened to me. I had a case manager that went to bat for me and said I was ready for this job. And I had an amazing clinician that showed me it was possible to forgive myself and my mother. To be honest, I wouldn't have ever believed that any of those were possible. Something else that happened while I was getting services at CMH, this is the first time in my life that I was able to tell people that I was molested as a child. I had never been able to talk about it before. I never told my family about it. I was molested by a family member. No one's going to believe in me or believe me. So I kept that quiet my entire life until I was getting services here at CMH is when I began to speak up about that. And I realized something amazing. Every time I talk about being molested, every time I admit to it, it gets easier. I feel better. And I feel less of the pain. So that was an amazing thing. I encourage others to talk about similar issues that they have them. Trust me, it feels better. So a lot of amazing things started to happen. Unfortunately, the relationship I was in, we had just really gone two different directions. So that relationship ended, and now I'm starting over brand new with a new job and a new home and a new life. Now my life is filled with things I never expected. Before, my life was filled with alcohol, guilt, and anger and regret. Now my life is filled with serenity, the one thing I was always looking for, gratitude. I'm just so grateful every day. I just wake up with so much gratitude that I no longer feel the way I did a few years ago. And now I have purpose. I have purpose to help other veterans. I love veterans. I love working with them. I love helping them. There is a writer named S.A. Jefferson Wright that once said that serenity is not freedom from the storm, but peace amid the storm. Serenity is not freedom from the storm, but peace amid the storm. Wow, I love that statement. Life is always going to be crazy. Life's always going to be wild. There's going to be things outside of my control. But that doesn't mean that I have to feel that way on the inside. On the inside, I can be at peace and I can accept things as they come, which is not something I was able to do before. So it's been an amazing ride, an amazing journey. That wraps up my presentation, but we do have a couple minutes. I'm finishing up a couple minutes early. We do need to keep going until 11 o'clock. I'm looking now in your comments, and thank you all so much for your comments, but I'm not seeing any questions. Would any of you have any questions about anything I've shared, anything I do now, other veterans? While I'm waiting for a question, I can tell you another story that was always on my mind. I remember when I was getting discharged, there was a captain in the Marine Corps that did the investigation into my events, what I did. I knew this captain. I had helped him with other investigations. We respected one another. We were close with one another. So when I was getting close to leaving the Marine Corps, he sat me down. He said, "Look, I wanted to tell you something. I'll finish this story in a second. I do see my first question. My first question comes from Kathleen Shepard. Any top pieces of advice for clients feeling ready for change?" I think go into everything with an open mind. They need to go into everything with an open mind. You know, I believed that I was not helpable, that it wasn't possible to help me. I believed that no one would want to help me. I believed I was too far gone, that it wasn't possible for me to feel better, for me to get better. But it all was. I just had to believe. That was a very difficult step for me. I hope that that answers that question. So the captain tells me this. He tells me a few years ago, I saw another hardworking staff sergeant discharged, and I told him that one day he's going to feel better, and one day he's going to look back at this positively. One day he's not going to regret this, and he's going to see that he got strength from this. And I'm telling you the same thing, Polito. Now, I ran into that other Marine a few years ago, Polito, and he told me, when you first told me that, I hated you for telling me that. And for several years I did. But now I've grown and I've realized you were right. And he said, Polito, the same thing's going to happen to you. And I did hate him for saying that. I was angry at him. How dare he tell me that I would be better after this, that I could get better after losing the Marine Corps, which was so important to me. But you know what? I have found that strength. And I do thank him for what he said. And I do thank him because he was right. Things did get better. Things can always get better. That's another thing I would tell your new individuals. Things can get better. I tell my individuals, if I can get better, I think anyone can. Because would have never believed it was possible for me to not drink, not hate myself. Man, it's all possible. Anything's possible with serenity. Where can we find the quote? I had a question. If you just look up this author, you will find the quote. The author's name is S.A. The S is his initials, S, then A, and then the author has a hyphenated name. The name is Jefferson Wright. That's Wright is Wright. S.A. Jefferson Wright was that author. And again, that quote was, "Serenity is not freedom from the storm, but peace amid the storm." That was the quote. So I hope that answers your question. We got a few seconds left. I'm looking for any other questions I may have. I'm not seeing any more. That's just about it. I think we're almost down to the last minute. Are there any more questions at all? Anyone else? Okay. Once again, my name is Victor Polito. I'm the veteran peer support here at St. Clair Community Mental Health. And it looks like it's 11 o'clock. It looks like our time has expired. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I appreciate it. Everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Victor. That was for sharing your story. That was really inspiring. Just a quick reminder, the Recovery Summit is going on all month with different topics and speakers planned each weekday. Tomorrow's presentation will be at 1 p.m. presented by Ken Hoovelman from the Odyssey House on MORT, which is Mobile Overdose Response Team. To see information and register for additional sessions, please visit sccmh.org under the Events tab and Recovery Summit. Individuals requesting professional credits, you will receive your certificate of accumulated credits by the end of October via email. As a reminder, please complete the short survey at the conclusion of the webinar. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thank you again, Victor. This is a really good presentation, and thank you for sharing your story. Thank you all who attended this morning, and have a great day.